Hi, I'm Celeste. My husband of 12 years took me on a romantic getaway to Willowbrook Falls, promising it would save our crumbling marriage. I thought the handwritten note I found in his jacket pocket was meant for me, a sweet surprise, maybe an apology. Instead, it read, "Can't wait to start our new life together once you're finally free. All my love, Veronica." What would you do if the trip meant to heal your heart became the moment it shattered completely? Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. They say that love dies quietly, in small moments you don't notice until it's too late. But sometimes it dies with a scream that echoes through every corner of your soul, and you realize you've been living with a stranger who's been counting down the days until he could escape. That morning in Willowbrook Falls, I woke up believing my marriage still had a chance. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and morning dew through our cabin windows. Damien was already up, standing on the deck with his coffee, looking out at the lake that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. For a moment, watching him there in his navy sweater, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. "Good morning, beautiful," he said when he noticed me watching, and his smile looked genuine, real, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, our last-ditch effort to save what was left of us. The fights had become daily occurrences, the silence between us stretching longer each night. Our therapist, Dr. Holloway, had suggested we get away somewhere without distractions, somewhere we could remember who we used to be together. "Maybe if you can reconnect with why you chose each other," she'd said, "you can find your way back." I'd clung to that hope like a lifeline. Damien had picked Willowbrook Falls himself, booking us a cabin at Moonstone Resort, the same place we'd spent our first anniversary. "Full circle," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "Back to where we were happiest." The first day had been promising. We'd hiked the Cascade Trail, holding hands for the first time in months. We'd laughed over dinner at the Timber Lodge, sharing stories about our early dating days. For brief, beautiful moments, I felt like we might actually make it. That night, as we sat by the fireplace, Damien had pulled me close and whispered, "I'm sorry for how distant I've been, Celeste. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I'd gone to sleep believing him. But trust is a fragile thing, and sometimes the universe has a cruel way of showing you just how fragile. The next morning, while Damien was in the shower, I'd offered to pack his hiking jacket, the charcoal gray one he'd worn the day before. That's when I felt the crinkle of paper in the inner pocket. My first instinct was to leave it alone, respect his privacy. But something about the careful way it was folded, the deliberate placement, made me pause. The paper was cream-colored, expensive. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, written in purple ink with the kind of careful loops that suggested someone who still wrote in cursive by choice. "My dearest Damien," it began, and my stomach dropped before I'd even finished the first line. "Only 2 more days until you tell her, and then we can finally stop hiding. I know this trip is hard for you, pretending everything is okay when you know it's over. But after Friday, we'll never have to pretend again. I've already found us the perfect apartment in Rosefield Heights, and I've been imagining waking up next to you every morning without having to sneak around. I love how you've handled this whole situation with such care. Most men wouldn't have bothered with the charade of a save-the-marriage trip. But that's why I love you. You're too kind to just blindside her. You want to give her one last good memory before you break her heart. Just remember, what we have is real. What you have with her is just habit now. In 48 hours, you'll be free to love me the way we both want you to. Can't wait to start our new life together once you're finally free. All my love, Veronica." I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. The shower was still running. Steam was creeping under the bathroom door. Damien was humming, actually humming, while he washed his hair, probably thinking about his perfect plan, his careful timeline, his 48-hour countdown to freedom.
My hands were shaking so hard I could barely fold the note back into its original creases. I slipped it back into his pocket exactly where I'd found it. My movements mechanical, robotic, as if I were defusing a bomb instead of putting back the evidence of my marriage's execution. The woman staring back at me in the cabin's antique mirror looked like a stranger. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same freckles across my nose that Damien used to trace with his finger. But there was something hollow in that reflection, something that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed where we'd made love just 2 nights ago, where he'd whispered promises about our future, and tried to process what I'd just learned. This entire trip, every smile, every "I love you," every moment I'd felt hopeful about saving our marriage, it had all been a performance, a farewell tour. Damien wasn't trying to save our marriage, he was giving me a mercy killing. The bathroom door opened, and he walked out with a towel around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his shoulders. "Ready for another beautiful day?" he asked, that same genuine smile spreading across his face. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd never noticed that his smiles never quite reached his eyes anymore. "Absolutely," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can't wait to see what today brings." Because now I knew exactly what today would bring, and tomorrow, and the day after that when he planned to destroy my world and call it kindness. But here's what Damien didn't know about his wife of 12 years. I'd spent a decade working as an investigative researcher for Hartwell and Associates, and I'd gotten very, very good at uncovering secrets. He thought he was giving me one last perfect memory. Instead, he just handed me exactly what I needed to uncover the truth about who he really was. This trip was about to become very interesting indeed. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Have you ever had to smile and pretend everything was perfect while your world was crumbling behind your eyes? Have you ever had to sit across from someone at breakfast, watching them butter their toast and plan your day together, knowing they were counting down the hours until they could walk away from you forever? That's exactly where I found myself that morning in Willowbrook Falls, sitting across from Damien at the Timber Lodge restaurant, watching him study the hiking trail map like we were planning the adventure of a lifetime, instead of what he'd designed as my farewell tour. "What do you think about the Overlook Point Trail today?" he asked, pointing to a spot on the map. "The reviews say the sunset view is incredible, perfect for—" He paused, and I watched something flicker across his face. "Perfect for making memories." I took a sip of my coffee, tasting nothing but bitterness. "Sounds absolutely perfect," I said, and meant every word, though not for the reasons he thought. Here's what I want you to think about as I tell you this story. What would you do if you discovered that the person you trusted most had turned your entire life into a carefully orchestrated lie? Would you confront them immediately? Would you run? Would you fight back? Because I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why I chose the path I did. You'll see how sometimes the person who thinks they're playing chess is actually just a pawn in someone else's game. And if you've ever felt like someone underestimated you, if you've ever been treated like you were too naive or too trusting to see what was right in front of you, then you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happened next. I'm going to show you how a woman who was supposed to be the victim became the one holding all the cards. How a marriage that was meant to end with my heart broken became something else entirely. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you team confront him immediately or team gather evidence first? Because trust me, what I discovered about Damien and Veronica was just the beginning. This story has more twists than that mountain road we drove up to get to Willowbrook Falls, and I guarantee you won't see the ending coming. The truth about my husband's secret life. It was so much darker than just an affair. And what I did with that information? Well, let's just say Damien learned the hard way that investigative researchers don't just uncover secrets. Sometimes we use them. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt in the moment you discover it. It reaches backward through time, poisoning every memory, every tender moment, every time you thought you were building something beautiful together. As I sat in that restaurant, watching Damien trace hiking routes with his finger, my mind started replaying our last 6 months, like a detective reviewing evidence she'd missed the first time. It had started with the late nights at the office. Damien worked as a marketing director for Pinnacle Communications, and suddenly, around January, his projects became urgent, demanding, requiring him to stay until 9, sometimes 10 o'clock. "Big client," he'd say, kissing my forehead when he finally came home. "Thompson Industries is really pushing for this rebrand, and if we land this contract, it could change everything for us." I'd believed him because I wanted to. Because when you love someone, you give them the benefit of every doubt, even when those doubts start multiplying like weeds. Then came the phone calls he'd take in the other room, quick conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the kitchen. "Work stuff," he'd explain, but his voice had a different quality during those calls. Softer, more intimate. The voice you use when you're talking to someone who matters. I'd started noticing other things too. The way he'd shower immediately when he came home from these late nights, as if washing something away. How he'd started buying new cologne. Expensive bottles I'd never seen before. The subscription to that upscale gym in the Riverside district, the one that cost 3 times more than our local fitness center. "I need to take better care of myself," he'd said when I questioned the expense. "For us. I want to be the best version of myself for our marriage." Even his lies had been wrapped in declarations of love for me. But it was the small changes that hurt the most, now that I understood what they meant. The way he'd stopped reaching for me in bed. How his goodnight kisses became perfunctory pecks on the cheek. How he'd started doing his own laundry, claiming he didn't want to burden me with his work clothes. How many times had he been washing away traces of her perfume, her lipstick, her touch? I remembered the night in March when I'd suggested we book a weekend getaway. "We never do anything spontaneous anymore," I'd said, curled up next to him on the couch while he scrolled through his phone. "Remember when we used to just pick a direction and drive?" He'd looked up from his screen, and I now realized he'd probably been texting Veronica with genuine panic in his eyes. "This month is really crazy, Celeste. Maybe after the Thompson project wraps up?" The Thompson project, that I now understood, was probably code for whatever elaborate double life he'd been constructing. Then there was the evening in April when I'd gotten home early from my job at Hartwell and Associates and found him in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with a jewelry box in his hands. For one wild, hopeful moment, I'd thought he was planning to propose again, maybe renew our vows, do something romantic to fix whatever had been growing cold between us. "Surprise shopping?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice light. He'd startled, snapping the box closed so quickly I barely caught a glimpse of what was inside. But it had looked like a necklace. Delicate and expensive, with what might have been diamonds catching the afternoon light. "It's for your birthday," he'd stammered, though my birthday wasn't for another 4 months. "I saw it and thought of you." I'd never received that necklace. Now I understood why. The worst part was how thoughtful he'd seemed during those months. Suddenly, he was bringing me coffee in bed, leaving sweet notes in my lunch bag, suggesting we try new restaurants in town. I thought he was making an effort, trying to rekindle what we'd lost. I'd felt guilty for feeling distant, for noticing the late nights and the phone calls. "He's trying so hard," I'd told my sister Autumn during one of our weekly calls. "I think we might actually be turning a corner." Autumn had been my maid of honor, had danced at our wedding, had held me while I cried during our worst fights last fall. "What changed?" she'd asked. "You were so worried about him pulling away." "I don't know," I'd said. "Maybe he realized what he could lose." The irony was suffocating. He had realized what he could lose. The security of having a faithful wife at home while he explored whatever passion he'd found with Veronica. I'd been the safety net he could return to if his affair didn't work out, the fallback plan he could discard once he was certain his new love was sustainable. Every kind gesture, every surprise dinner, every "I love you" had been part of his exit strategy. He'd been trying to minimize his guilt, not rebuild our connection. I thought about the marriage counseling sessions we'd started in February. Dr. Holloway's office on Elmwood Avenue, with its calming earth tones and inspirational quotes about healing relationships. Damien had suggested we try therapy, claiming he wanted to work on our communication. "I feel like we're living parallel lives," he'd said during our first session, his hand reaching across the couch to squeeze mine. "I want to find our way back to each other. Dr. Holloway had smiled approvingly. That's exactly the kind of commitment that helps couples rebuild. Now I realized those sessions had been his research. He'd been learning the language of marital repair so he could simulate it convincingly. Every exercise she'd given us, every homework assignment about reconnecting, had been his master class in how to fake reconciliation. The cruelest part was that it had worked. I'd started believing we were healing. When he'd suggested this trip to Willowbrook Falls, I'd actually cried with relief. Just like our first anniversary, he'd said, booking the same cabin, the same resort. We'll remember why we fell in love. But he hadn't been planning our second chance. He'd been planning my goodbye party, choreographing the final performance of our marriage so he could leave with a clear conscience. Sitting across from him now, watching him plan our day with such careful attention, I wondered how many details of this trip he'd shared with Veronica. Had he told her about booking our old cabin? Had they laughed about the poetic justice of ending our marriage where it had felt strongest? "You're quiet this morning," Damien said, looking up from the trail map. "Everything okay?" I met his eyes, those warm brown eyes I'd stared into while saying my wedding vows, and smiled. "Just thinking about how perfect this is. How lucky we are to have this time together." "We are lucky," he agreed, and I heard the note of finality in his voice. Very lucky. 2 more days, I thought. In 48 hours, he planned to shatter my world and call it kindness. But Damien had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd married an investigative researcher, someone who spent her days uncovering hidden truths and connecting dots that others missed. Someone who knew that the surface story was rarely the whole story. He thought he was managing a naive wife who trusted too easily. He had no idea he was playing games with someone who professionally dismantled lies for a living. This trip was supposed to be my ending. Instead, it was about to become his. After breakfast, Damien went to shower and change for our hike, leaving me alone with his phone on the table. He'd never done that before. Always kept it with him, even taking it to the bathroom. But today, maybe because he thought his secret was safe. Maybe because we were in the middle of nowhere with spotty reception, he'd grown careless. I stared at the black screen for exactly 30 seconds, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Every moral fiber in my body said to leave it alone, that looking through your husband's phone was a violation of trust. But then I remembered Veronica's note, still folded in his jacket pocket upstairs, and realized that trust was already broken. I just hadn't been invited to the conversation about it. The phone was password protected, but I knew Damien better than he realized. He'd always been sentimental about numbers. Our anniversary, my birthday, his mother's birthday. The fourth combination I tried worked. 0924. The date we'd first said, "I love you" to each other, 8 years ago, on a rainy September evening when we'd gotten caught in a downpour walking home from our favorite Thai restaurant. My hands were trembling as I opened his messages. I almost lost my nerve when I saw our last text exchange from yesterday. "Can't wait to see you, beautiful. This trip is exactly what we need." Heart emoji. Kiss emoji. The performance continued even in digital form. But then I scrolled up and found what I was looking for. A conversation thread with a contact listed simply as V. The messages went back months. March 15th. V. I can't keep doing this, Damien. It's been 4 months. When are you going to tell her? March 15th. Damien, soon, I promise. I need to find the right way. She doesn't deserve to be blindsided. March 15th. V. I'm tired of being your secret. I'm tired of you going home to her every night. March 15th. Damien, you know it's not like that anymore. I haven't touched her in months. I had to put the phone down. The casual cruelty of it, the way he discussed our intimate life with another woman, made my stomach lurch. But I forced myself to keep reading. April 2nd. V. Saw the necklace he picked out. It's gorgeous. I can't wait to wear it to the Meridian Gallery opening. April 2nd. Damien, you'll be the most beautiful woman there. I can't wait to show you off properly. April 2nd. V. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. I've already started looking at apartments in Rosefield Heights. The Meridian Gallery. I knew that place. It was the trendy art gallery downtown that hosted monthly exhibits. I'd suggested we go to their spring opening in April, but Damien had said he had to work late. Thompson Industries, he'd claimed. Always the Thompson Industries excuse. May 18th. V. My sister keeps asking when she's going to meet my mysterious boyfriend. I hate lying to everyone. May 18th. Damien, I know, love. The trip to Willowbrook Falls is our exit strategy. I'll give Celeste one perfect weekend, then I'll tell her when we get back. Clean break. May 18th. V. You're too good to her. Most men would just file for divorce. May 18th. Damien, she's been a good wife. She deserves better than just being abandoned. A good wife. Past tense. As if I were already a memory. Already something he'd moved beyond while I was still living in the present tense of our marriage. I scrolled down to more recent messages, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. July 10th. V. Are you sure about the timing? Taking her somewhere romantic just to break up with her seems cruel. July 10th. Damien. It's not cruel. It's closure. She'll have good memories of us, of our marriage. It'll help her heal. July 10th. V. If you say so. I'll start packing my apartment. 2 more days and we can finally be together properly. July 10th. Damien, I love you, Veronica. After Friday, no more hiding. July 10th. Yesterday. While I'd been packing for our romantic getaway, while I'd been hoping this trip would save our marriage, he'd been coordinating the end of it with his girlfriend. The shower was still running upstairs. I had maybe 5 more minutes before Damien came down. My hands moved on autopilot, screenshotting the most damning conversations, sending them to my own phone, then deleting the sent messages from his phone so he wouldn't know I'd discovered anything. But as I scrolled through months of their relationship, I found something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just an affair. It was something much more calculated. February 3rd. V. I ran the numbers again. With her salary at Hartwell & Associates and the house value, you're looking at significant alimony payments if she fights the divorce. February 3rd. Damien. She won't fight it. Not if I handle this right. She's too trusting. February 3rd. V. My friend Jessica went through something similar. Her ex got out of most of the settlement by proving emotional abandonment. If you can show that the marriage was already over, that you'd been living like roommates. February 3rd. Damien. That's why the counseling sessions are perfect. I'm documenting everything. Her inability to connect, her emotional distance. My vision blurred. The marriage counseling sessions. He'd been building a case against me. Every time Dr. Holloway had asked about our connection, every time he'd sadly shaken his head and talked about how I seemed checked out lately, he'd been constructing a narrative that would minimize his financial obligations in a divorce. March 22nd. V. Did you get her to sign anything recently? Joint account changes? Insurance beneficiaries? March 22nd. Damien, working on it. There's a new life insurance policy I want to update. Just have to find the right moment. Life insurance. My hands started shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. April 15th. V. My friend who works at Clearwater Insurance says there's usually a waiting period for suicide clauses. Just something to keep in mind. April 15th. Damien, why would that matter? April 15th. V. Never mind, just thinking about all the angles. I had to read that exchange 3 times before it sank in. Veronica wasn't just helping him plan a divorce. She was thinking about what would happen if I wasn't around to divorce at all. The shower turned off upstairs. I heard Damien's footsteps moving around the bathroom, the sound of the hairdryer starting up. I had maybe 2 minutes left. I scrolled frantically through more recent messages, looking for anything about insurance policies or beneficiaries. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. June 30th. Damien, good news. She signed the insurance update without even reading it. Beneficiary changes went through. June 30th. V. How much? June 30th. Damien, $800K. More than enough to start over somewhere nice. June 30th. V. You're brilliant. She really didn't suspect anything? June 30th. Damien told her it was just updating our coverage after her promotion. She was so happy I was thinking about our future together. I remembered that day. I'd gotten a small raise at Hartwell & Associates, and Damien had surprised me with champagne and takeout from our favorite Italian place. "We should update our insurance," he'd said. "Make sure we're protected now that you're moving up in the world." I'd signed the papers while we ate, grateful that he was thinking practically about our shared future. The hairdryer stopped. I heard the bathroom door open. I quickly deleted my recent activity from his phone, closed all the apps, and placed it exactly where he'd left it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup, but I forced myself to look normal, scrolled through my own phone as if I'd been checking social media. "Ready for that hike?" Damien called from the stairs, his voice cheerful, loving. "Can't wait," I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. But everything had changed in those 15 minutes. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This wasn't just about a man who'd fallen out of love and wanted to start over. Damien and Veronica had been planning more than my heartbreak. They'd been planning my disappearance. And this romantic trip to a remote mountain location, this thoughtful gesture of giving me one last perfect memory, suddenly took on a much darker meaning. The isolation that was supposed to help us reconnect could just as easily make an accident look believable. The hiking trails he was so eager to explore could be dangerous for someone who might slip and fall. The life insurance policy I'd signed without reading could be the real reason he'd brought me here. I was no longer just a wife about to be divorced. I was a problem to be solved. And Damien thought he'd found the perfect solution. Damien came down the stairs wearing his hiking boots and that charcoal gray jacket, the one that held Veronica's note like a loaded gun in his pocket. He looked so normal, so familiar with his tousled brown hair and that easy smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. If I hadn't just read months of his text messages planning my potential demise, I might have thought he looked handsome, ready for a romantic adventure. "Beautiful day for a hike," he said, kissing my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. "Perfect," I managed, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. As we drove toward the Overlook Point trailhead, I found myself studying every detail of the route. The narrow mountain roads with their sharp curves and steep drop-offs. The way the cellular service flickered in and out as we climbed higher. How isolated we'd be once we started hiking. How long it might take for help to arrive if something happened. If something happened. As if it would be an accident. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. A slip near a cliff edge during our romantic sunset viewing. An allergic reaction to something in our packed lunch. I developed a severe nut allergy 2 years ago, something Damien knew well. A fall down one of the rocky slopes, maybe after I'd had a little too much of the wine he'd suggested we bring to celebrate our new beginning. "You're quiet," Damien observed, glancing at me while he navigated a particularly steep curve. "Having second thoughts about the challenging trail?" The way he said challenging made my stomach clench. "No, just thinking about how peaceful it'll be up there. Just the two of us, completely alone." "Completely alone," he repeated, and I caught something in his tone. Satisfaction, maybe, or anticipation. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Autumn. "How's the romantic getaway going? Are you and Damien working things out?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? That my husband might be planning to kill me? That the man who'd promised to love and protect me was potentially calculating the best way to make my death look accidental? I typed and deleted a dozen responses. "Everything's complicated." Delete. "I'm scared." Delete. "I think I might be in danger." Delete. Finally, I wrote, "Still figuring things out. I'll call you when I get back." At least if something happened to me, Autumn would know to ask questions. But even as I sent the message, I realized how impossible this all sounded. If I called Autumn right now and told her what I'd discovered, what would I say? That I'd found a love note and some text messages, and now I was convinced my husband was planning to murder me for insurance money? It sounded like the plot of a bad thriller movie, not something that happened to real people in real marriages. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the text about suicide clauses was just Veronica being thorough about divorce implications. Maybe the insurance policy change was innocent, just Damien being responsible about our coverage like he'd claimed. Maybe I was letting my hurt over the affair twist innocent financial planning into something sinister. But then I remembered the tone in Veronica's messages, the clinical way she discussed angles and waiting periods. I remembered how carefully Damien had orchestrated this trip, insisting on the remote location, the challenging hiking trails, the romantic isolation that could just as easily be dangerous isolation. "There's a great spot about a mile up where we can stop for lunch," Damien said, consulting the trail map he'd downloaded, "right near Widow's Point. The name sounds ominous, but the views are supposed to be spectacular." Widow's Point. The irony was so thick I almost laughed, but nothing about this felt funny anymore. We reached the trailhead parking area, a small gravel lot surrounded by towering pines. There were only 2 other cars there. "A good sign for solitude," Damien noted cheerfully. "A bad sign for witnesses," my paranoid brain added. As we gathered our hiking gear, I tried to think through my options logically, the way I would approach any investigation at Hartwell and Associates. What did I actually know? Damien was having an affair, planning to leave me, and had changed our life insurance policy without me understanding the implications. Concerning, yes. Criminal, possibly not. What did I suspect? That he and Veronica had planned this trip as an opportunity to make my death look accidental, collecting $800,000 and starting their new life together without the messy complications of divorce proceedings. What could I prove? Nothing that would convince a police officer or a judge. Text messages about insurance policies weren't evidence of murder plots. Love notes weren't death threats. My suspicions, however legitimate they felt, were still just suspicions. But here's what I knew about investigations. The best way to expose a conspiracy is to let it unfold while documenting everything. If Damien was planning something, he'd have to show his hand eventually. And when he did, I'd be ready. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, hitting record and slipping it back into my jacket pocket. Whatever happened on this hike, there would be audio evidence. I also sent a quick location share to Autumn, disguising it as a scenic photo. Starting our hike at Overlook Point. Such beautiful views up here. "Ready to head up?" Damien asked, shouldering his backpack. He'd packed it himself this morning, insisting he wanted to surprise me with a special lunch. Now I wondered what else might be in there besides sandwiches. "Actually, let me use the restroom first," I said, nodding toward the small facility at the edge of the parking area. Inside the dimly lit bathroom, I leaned against the sink and tried to calm my racing heart. I had to make a choice. I could confront Damien right now, demand explanations, refuse to go on this hike. But if I was wrong about his intentions, I'd be destroying our marriage over my own paranoia. And if I was right about his intentions, confronting him might force his hand in a way that put me in immediate danger. Or I could play along, stay alert, and see what he actually planned to do. Let him think he was still in control while I gathered evidence. It was risky, but it was also the smart move, assuming I could stay one step ahead of whatever he had planned. I thought about my job at Hartwell and Associates. All the cases I'd worked where the truth only emerged when people felt safe enough to reveal their real intentions. Some of the most damning evidence I'd ever collected came from subjects who thought they were unobserved, unrecorded, free to act without consequences. Damien thought he was dealing with a naive, trusting wife who wouldn't see the danger until it was too late. He had no idea he was dealing with someone who spent her professional life uncovering hidden truths and documenting criminal behavior. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't a victim, she was an investigator. And for the first time since finding that note, I felt something other than fear. I felt like I had a plan. When I emerged from the bathroom, Damien was checking his phone, frowning at the screen. "No signal up here," he said. "I guess we're really going to be disconnected from the world." "Good," I said, shouldering my own backpack and checking that my phone was still recording. Sometimes disconnecting is exactly what you need to see things clearly. As we started up the trail, Damien took my hand, just like he had during our first anniversary trip to this same mountain. His palm was warm, familiar, the hand that had held mine during our wedding ceremony, that had comforted me during my father's funeral, that had touched me with what I believed was love for 12 years. Now it felt like the hand of a stranger who was leading me towards something I couldn't quite see yet, but was preparing for nonetheless. "This is going to be perfect, Celeste," he said, squeezing my fingers. "I promise you, this day is going to change everything." "I believe you," I said, and meant it in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Because, one way or another, this day was going to reveal the truth about who my husband really was, and when it did, I'd be ready. The first mile of the Overlook Point Trail was deceptively gentle, winding through dense pine forest with occasional glimpses of the valley below. Damien kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out wildflowers, commenting on the crisp mountain air, playing the role of attentive husband so perfectly that if I hadn't seen those text messages, I might have believed we were actually on a romantic hike to save our marriage. "Remember our first time here?" he asked as we approached a familiar wooden bridge spanning a creek. "You were so afraid of heights, but I convinced you to look over the edge." I remembered. I'd been terrified of the drop, but he'd held my hand, promised he wouldn't let me fall. The trust I'd felt in that moment had been absolute, unshakable. Now, standing on that same bridge, I realized how perfectly it illustrated what our marriage had become. Me trusting him not to let me fall, while he calculated exactly how to make sure I did. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said, leaning against the railing and looking down at the rocky creek bed 20 feet below. It's amazing how perspective changes when you really understand what you're looking at. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or uncertainty. "You seem different today, Celeste. More confident." Maybe I'm finally seeing things clearly. We continued climbing, the trail becoming steeper and more challenging. My phone, still recording in my pocket, captured our conversation, his breathing, the sound of our boots on the rocky path. Evidence, I kept telling myself. Every word, every gesture, every moment of this performance was being documented. About halfway to the summit, we reached a scenic overlook where several other hikers had stopped to rest. A young couple from Portland, an elderly man with professional camera equipment, a family with 2 teenagers who were complaining about the climb. Normal people, living normal lives, unaware that they might be witnessing the final act of someone's marriage or someone's life. "Should we keep going?" Damien asked, consulting his trail map. "The real spectacular views are at Widow's Point, but it's another 1.5 miles, and much more, secluded." The way he emphasized that last word sent ice through my veins. But I smiled and shouldered my pack. "I'm up for it if you are. We came here to push ourselves, right?" As we left the other hikers behind, climbing toward the more remote sections of the trail, I made my decision. Not the decision about whether to trust Damien. That choice had been made the moment I read Veronica's note. This was a different decision, one that would determine whether I remained a victim or became something else entirely. I was going to let this play out. I was going to give Damien every opportunity to show me exactly who he really was, what he was really capable of, and I was going to document every moment of it. But I wasn't going to do it passively. "Damien," I said as we navigated a particularly narrow section of trail with a steep drop-off to our left. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Holloway said, about being honest with each other." He glanced back at me, his expression carefully neutral. "What about it?" "I think there are things we haven't been telling each other, important things." I watched his shoulders tense slightly. "What kind of things?" "Well, for instance," I said, keeping my voice light and conversational, "I know about the life insurance policy changes. The $800,000 policy where you made yourself the beneficiary." He stopped walking. For a long moment, the only sounds were the wind through the trees and my heart hammering in my chest. When he turned around, his face had gone completely blank. "How did you?" He caught himself. "Celeste, that was just updating our coverage. You signed the papers yourself." "I did. Without reading them, because I trusted you." I stepped closer, maintaining eye contact. "Just like I trusted you when you said you were working late all those nights. Just like I trusted you when you said this trip was about saving our marriage." His jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been having an affair with someone named Veronica for at least 4 months. You've been planning to leave me after this trip. And you've restructured our finances in a way that would benefit you significantly if something happened to me. The mask was starting to slip. I could see confusion, panic, and something darker flickering across his features. You went through my phone. I found Veronica's note first. The phone just filled in the details. We stood facing each other on that narrow trail, the truth finally naked between us. Below us, the valley stretched out in beautiful greens and golds, peaceful and serene. Above us, storm clouds were beginning to gather, casting shadows that turned the afternoon light gray and ominous. Celeste, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. The question is, what are you going to do now that I know? It was a dangerous question, maybe a stupid question, but I needed to know who I was really dealing with. Was Damien a cheating husband trying to minimize his financial losses in a divorce? Or was he something worse? His eyes darted around, taking in our isolation, the steep drop-offs, the fact that we were completely alone now. I could practically see him recalculating, adjusting his plans in real time. You weren't supposed to find out like this, he said finally. I was going to tell you tomorrow, after we got back. I was going to do it properly. Properly? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call this charade? Bringing me to the same place where we celebrated our first anniversary, pretending to work on our marriage while you count down the hours until you can leave me for another woman? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Damien? Explain it to me. Explain the insurance policy. Explain why Veronica was researching suicide clauses. Explain why you chose this particular location, this particular trail, for our quote, goodbye weekend. His face went pale. You saw that message about the suicide clause? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Because his shock wasn't about the existence of the message, it was about my knowledge of it. So it's true, I said softly. This isn't just about divorce. This is about making sure there is no divorce. Something shifted in his posture, in his expression. The loving husband performance was completely gone now, replaced by something calculating and cold. Celeste, you need to understand something. This marriage has been over for a long time. We've both been miserable. I've been miserable because my husband was pulling away from me. You've been miserable because you wanted to be with someone else. Those aren't the same thing. The result is the same. We're not happy together. So get a divorce. You don't need to kill me to be free, Damien. The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the mountain air like an accusation. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Damien laughed, but it was a sound without warmth. Kill you? Celeste, what kind of person do you think I am? I don't know anymore. That's what I'm trying to figure out. He took a step closer, and instinctively I took a step back, my heel catching on a loose rock. You're being paranoid. Yes, I'm leaving you. Yes, I've been planning it. But murder, that's insane. Then explain the insurance policy. Explain the suicide clause research. Explain why we're having this conversation on a remote mountain trail instead of in our living room. The insurance policy is just financial planning. Veronica was being thorough about understanding our assets. And we're here because I thought you deserved one good memory before I broke your heart. His explanations were reasonable, logical. They almost made sense. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he kept glancing at the trail behind me, at the steep drop-off, that made every instinct I'd developed as an investigator scream danger. Prove it, I said. Prove what? Prove that this is just about divorce. Call Veronica right now. Tell her the plan has changed, that you're going to tell me the truth, and we're going home to work out the divorce properly. There's no cell service up here. Then we go back down until there is. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more serious. Celeste, I think you should consider what's best for everyone here. You're talking about accusing me of planning to murder you. Do you have any idea what that would do to my career, my reputation, even if it's not true? Are you threatening me? I'm asking you to be reasonable. We're both adults. We can handle this like adults. But the way he said it, the way he was positioning himself between me and the way back down the trail, made it clear that his definition of reasonable and mine were very different things. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone, still recording. Whatever happened next, it would be documented. And suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore, I was angry. For 12 years, I'd trusted this man with my heart, my future, my life. I had made excuses for his distance, blamed myself for his coldness, worked harder to be the wife he wanted. And all along, he'd been planning my exit from his life one way or another. You know what, Damien? You're right. We should handle this like adults. I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording, and opened my messages. Before he could react, I sent the audio file to 3 people: my sister Autumn, my colleague James at Hartwell & Associates, and my lawyer, Patricia Chen. "What are you doing?" "Handling this like an adult," I said, typing quickly. "I just sent a recording of our entire conversation to my sister, my colleague, and my attorney. If anything happens to me on this mountain, they'll know exactly where to start looking for answers." The change in his expression was immediate and complete. The last pretense of loving concern vanished, replaced by something much more honest and infinitely more dangerous. "Celeste, that was a very stupid thing to do." The words hung between us like a physical threat. Damien's face had transformed into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, with a hardness around his eyes that made me understand, finally and completely, that I was in real danger. "You think you're so smart," he said, taking another step toward me, "always analyzing everything, always thinking you know better than everyone else. That's been your problem our entire marriage, Celeste. You can't just let things be simple." I backed up another step, my heel-finding purchase on the rocky trail. The drop-off behind me was maybe 30 feet. Not necessarily fatal, but certainly enough to cause serious injury. Enough to make an accident look believable. Simple? I kept my voice steady, professional, the tone I used when interviewing difficult subjects at work. "You call insurance fraud and potential murder simple?" "I call survival simple. Do you have any idea what a divorce would cost me? What kind of alimony payments I'd be looking at with your salary and our shared assets?" Veronica ran the numbers, Celeste. "We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more." The casual way he discussed it, as if my life was just another line item in his financial planning, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "So this really is about money?"
Everything's about money eventually. You'd know that if you paid attention to anything beyond your little investigations and case files. He was circling slightly to his left, I realized, trying to position himself so that my only escape route would be backward, toward the edge. But I'd spent years interviewing people who didn't want to tell the truth, and I'd learned to read body language, to anticipate movements, to stay one step ahead of subjects who thought they were smarter than I was. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, taking a small step to my right, toward a cluster of boulders that might provide better footing. "The insurance policy was just the final piece, wasn't it?" Veronica suggested it in February. She's brilliant with financial strategy, much better than you ever were. She saw the whole picture from the beginning. "What picture?" "That keeping you around was a liability. Divorce is messy, expensive, complicated. But a grieving widower? That's clean, sympathetic, and profitable." The matter-of-fact way he discussed my death was almost more terrifying than his threats. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of rage. This was a business decision they'd made together, calculated and cold. "People will ask questions, Damien. My sister knows I'm here. My colleagues know about our marriage problems. They'll investigate." Will they? A tragic hiking accident on a dangerous trail? It happens all the time. Especially when someone's been dealing with depression, stress from a failing marriage. Dr. Holloway's notes will support that narrative beautifully. My blood went cold. "You were using therapy to build a case for my suicide?" "I was documenting your mental state, your inability to connect, your emotional distance, your apparent depression about our relationship. All very concerning signs, in retrospect." Every session flashed through my mind, how he'd guided conversations toward my supposed withdrawal, my apparent lack of investment in our marriage, how he'd expressed such touching concern about my well-being to Dr. Holloway, painting himself as the loving husband trying desperately to help his struggling wife. "You bastard," I whispered. "I'm a planner, Celeste. That's why I'm successful. That's why this will work." "What about Veronica?" She's comfortable with murder? Veronica understands necessity. She understands that sometimes you have to make difficult choices to get what you want. His smile was cold, predatory. She's actually quite excited about starting fresh with the insurance money. We're thinking about traveling, maybe buying a place in Costa Rica where $800,000 goes a lot further. They'd already planned their new life with my death money. The betrayal cut deeper than the fear, a pain so sharp it left me breathless. "The note I found," I said, understanding flooding through me. "It wasn't left accidentally. You wanted me to find it." "Very good. I was wondering when you'd figure that out. You wanted me upset, emotional, distracted, more likely to have an accident. Or to take matters into your own hands. Suicide would have been preferable, actually. Less chance of investigation, and the insurance pays out the same either way after the waiting period expires." I thought about the wine he'd suggested for our sunset viewing, the way he'd insisted on packing the lunch himself, his careful selection of this particular trail with its dangerous overlooks and isolated sections. "How were you planning to do it?" "Does it matter? The result is the same." But I needed to know. My investigative instincts demanded details, evidence, proof of intent. "The lunch you packed. What's in it?" His smile widened. "Just sandwiches and fruit, and a thermos of your favorite tea, the chamomile blend you love so much." Chamomile tea, which would mask the taste of almost anything dissolved into it. My mind raced through possibilities: sleeping pills, anxiety medication, anything that would make me drowsy or disoriented enough for a fall to look accidental. "Very thoughtful of you."
I've always been thoughtful. That's what made this so perfect. The caring husband, planning a romantic getaway to save his marriage, devastated when his depressed wife has a tragic accident. And if the drugs didn't work? If I didn't drink the tea? Well, accidents happen on mountain trails. Loose rocks, sudden weather changes, a moment of vertigo near a steep drop. His eyes flicked toward the edge behind me. These things are tragically unpredictable. I understood now why he'd been so insistent on this particular spot, this specific trail. He'd scouted it, planned it, chosen the perfect location for what he intended to look like an accident. "The only problem," I said, my voice gaining strength, "is that it's not going to work." "Because you sent some audio files to your sister?" "That's unfortunate, but not insurmountable. Mental health episodes can be sudden, unpredictable. You could have sent those messages in a paranoid state, making wild accusations before your tragic decision to end your pain." He had an answer for everything. Every contingency planned, every angle covered, almost every angle. "You're forgetting something, Damien." "What's that?" "I'm not just some random wife you're trying to murder for money. I'm an investigative researcher. This is what I do for a living: uncover conspiracies, document evidence, expose criminals." His confidence flickered for the first time. "What's your point?" "My point is that while you and Veronica were planning my death, I was planning something too." I pulled out my phone again, this time opening the app that connected to the GPS tracker I'd hidden in his backpack that morning while he was showering. A tiny device from my toolkit at Hartwell & Associates that would record our exact location and movements throughout the day. "What is that?" "Insurance," I said. "The kind that actually protects people instead of profiting from their deaths." I showed him the screen, where our location was being tracked in real time, along with timestamps and coordinates that would prove exactly where we'd been and when. Every step of this hike is documented, every place we've stopped, every conversation we've had, and not just the audio I recorded, there's video too. His face went white. "Video? Did you really think I'd come up here unprepared? I've been wearing a body camera since we left the parking lot." "Every threat you've made, every admission of your plan, every detail about the insurance fraud, it's all recorded in high definition." It was a lie. I didn't have a body camera. But Damien didn't know that, and the doubt in his eyes told me the bluff was working. "You're lying." "Am I? Do you want to take that chance?" "Because here's what's going to happen, Damien. We're going to walk back down this trail together. We're going to get in the car. We're going to drive back to the cabin. and then you're going to call Veronica and tell her the plan is off. And if I don't, then you're going to find out exactly what happens when someone tries to murder an investigative researcher who specializes in exposing criminal conspiracies. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, not just annoyance or frustration. You can't prove anything. I can prove enough. Financial records, text messages, insurance documents, recorded confessions, GPS evidence, witness statements. Even if some of it gets thrown out, enough will stick to destroy your life. I took a step forward, claiming back some of the space he'd been trying to control. The question is, do you want to be a man who tried to murder his wife and failed? Or do you want to be a man who made some very bad decisions but stopped before it was too late? The mountain wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees around us. Storm clouds were moving in faster now, casting shadows that made the afternoon feel later than it was. In the distance, I could hear the faint rumble of thunder. Damien stood frozen, calculating, trying to figure out if he could still salvage his plan or if it was too late to turn back. But I already knew the answer. It had been too late the moment he underestimated the woman he'd married, the moment he assumed that love made me weak instead of dangerous. He'd wanted to eliminate a problem. Instead, he'd created a much bigger one. And now he was about to learn exactly what that felt like. The thunder grew louder, rolling across the valley like a warning. Damien's face cycled through a dozen emotions: rage, fear, calculation, desperation, before settling into something I recognized from our early dating days: charm. He was going to try to charm his way out of this. "Celeste, sweetheart," he said, his voice shifting back into the warm, loving tone that had fooled me for months. "I think we've both gotten carried away here. You're scared, I'm frustrated, and we're saying things we don't mean." I almost laughed at the audacity. Even now, even after confessing to planning my murder, he thought he could manipulate me with pet names and false concern. "Oh, I meant every word," I said. "The question is whether you did." "Of course I didn't mean it. God, Celeste, you think I could actually hurt you? You think I'm capable of murder?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. I was angry about the affair being exposed, embarrassed about my plans falling apart. "I said things to hurt you because I was hurt. You described your murder plan in remarkable detail for someone who was just saying hurtful things." "It wasn't a murder plan. It was, I don't know, some kind of sick fantasy that Veronica put in my head. She watches too many crime shows, always talking about what would happen if something happened to you. I never took it seriously." He was good. If I hadn't read months of text messages planning this exact scenario, if I hadn't seen the clinical way they discussed insurance policies and suicide clauses, I might have started to doubt myself. "So the chamomile tea in your backpack is just chamomile tea?" His pause was barely a heartbeat, but I caught it. "Of course it's just tea. What else would it be?" "Then you won't mind if I test it when we get back to the cabin. I have field testing kits in my car. Part of my job involves checking for various substances." Another pause. "You're being paranoid, but fine. Test whatever you want." But something had shifted in his posture, a subtle tensing that told me he was calculating again. The storm was moving in faster now, dark clouds swallowing the peaks around us. The wind was picking up, making the tall pines sway ominously. "We should head back," he said, glancing at the sky. "This weather is getting dangerous." "Agreed. After you." I gestured toward the trail leading back down the mountain, making it clear I intended to stay behind him where I could watch his movements. But as he turned to start walking, I caught the quick glance he shot toward his backpack, toward whatever was in that thermos that had made him pause when I mentioned testing it. The descent was treacherous in the increasing wind. Loose rocks skittered under our feet, and the growing darkness made it harder to see the trail markers. Damien kept up a steady stream of conversation, playing the concerned husband worried about my mental state. "I think the stress of everything has gotten to you, sweetheart. Finding that note, reading my private messages, I understand why you jumped to wild conclusions. But we need to get you some help when we get home." "What kind of help?" "Therapy? Maybe medication. Dr. Holloway mentioned that you've seemed disconnected lately. Maybe this paranoid episode is a sign of something deeper." He was already constructing the narrative. If his plan had failed, he'd pivot to painting me as mentally unstable, someone whose accusations couldn't be trusted. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Who would believe a paranoid wife over a concerned husband? You're probably right, I said, playing along. I have been feeling paranoid lately, like someone was plotting against me. That's exactly what I mean. Healthy people don't jump from, my husband is having an affair, to, my husband is trying to murder me. That's a sign of serious mental health issues. We'd reached the scenic overlook where we'd seen the other hikers earlier. It was empty now, everyone else having headed down before the storm hit. The wind was howling through the trees, and the first fat raindrops were starting to fall. Maybe we should wait here, Damien said, pointing to a small shelter built for hikers. Let the worst of the storm pass. I looked at the three-sided wooden structure, isolated and private, with no witnesses and no cell service. I think we should keep moving. The trail will only get more dangerous if it gets muddy. Celeste, be reasonable. We could get struck by lightning out in the open. But I wasn't going into that shelter with him. Not when I could see him eyeing his backpack again. Not when I knew what might be in that thermos. I'm an experienced hiker, Damien. I can handle a little rain. Since when are you an experienced hiker? You've been on maybe a dozen trails in your entire life. It was a small slip, but telling. The loving husband would have supported my confidence, not undermined it. The man planning to make my death look accidental would want to establish that I was inexperienced, prone to making dangerous decisions. You're right, I said, playing into his narrative while continuing down the trail, and probably not thinking clearly. Good thing I have you to keep me safe. The rain was coming harder now, making the rocks slippery and treacherous. Damien stayed close behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence, could sense him watching for opportunities. Every loose rock, every slippery section, every moment where a stumble might look natural. Careful here, he said as we approached a particularly narrow section with a steep drop-off. These rocks get slippery when they're wet. Thanks for the warning, I said, but I noticed he didn't offer to go first, didn't position himself where he could catch me if I slipped. Instead, he stayed just far enough back that he could react to whatever happened, but not close enough to prevent it. The trail wound through a series of switchbacks, each turn taking us lower down the mountain but also deeper into the storm. Lightning was flashing in the distance now, followed by rumbles of thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath our feet. This is getting really dangerous, Damien called over the wind. We should find shelter. Almost to the parking lot, I called back, though we still had at least a mile to go. As we rounded another switchback, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The trail ahead was partially washed out, a section where the recent rains had created a muddy, unstable slope that dropped off sharply into the valley below. It was passable, but just barely, and only with extreme caution. Oh no, Damien said, but I caught something in his voice. Not dismay, satisfaction. This looks really dangerous, Celeste. One wrong step. We'll have to go very carefully, I said, studying the washout. The safe path was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, with loose soil and rocks on both sides. It would require perfect balance and complete concentration. Maybe I should go first, Damien offered. I'm heavier, more stable. No, I'll go. I'm lighter, less likely to destabilize the path. It was exactly the wrong thing to say, and I knew it the moment the words left my mouth. If I went first, I'd be in the most vulnerable position possible, completely focused on my footing while he watched from behind. If something happened, if I slipped, if rocks gave way beneath me, it would look completely natural. But I couldn't take it back without seeming more paranoid, and besides, I had a plan of my own. As I approached the washout, I pulled out my phone and activated the emergency beacon app that all Hartwell & Associates employees were required to carry. It would send my exact GPS coordinates to our office security team, along with an automatic distress signal. If anything happened to me, search and rescue would know exactly where to look. "What are you doing?" Damien asked. "Letting someone know our location," I said truthfully. "Standard safety protocol for dangerous hiking conditions." I saw the flash of anger cross his face before he controlled it. "We don't need rescue. We can handle this ourselves." Better safe than sorry. I started across the washout, testing each step carefully, feeling for solid ground beneath the loose soil. Behind me, I could hear Damien following, his breathing heavier than the exertion warranted. The rain was coming down steadily now, making everything slippery and unstable. Halfway across, I felt the ground shift slightly under my right foot. Instinctively, I shifted my weight to my left foot, looking for better purchase. It was then that I heard it. The scrape of a boot on loose rock, the sound of someone moving faster than they should on such treacherous ground. I spun around just in time to see Damien reaching toward me, his face a mask of concentration and determination. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw the truth there. This was his moment, his opportunity to make everything look like a tragic accident. But I was ready for him. As his hand reached for my shoulder, whether to push me or grab me, I'd never know, I dropped into a crouch and rolled to the side, using a defensive move I'd learned in the self-defense classes I'd been taking since last year. His momentum carried him forward, his foot landing where I'd been standing a second before. The loose soil gave way under his weight. For a moment, he teetered on the edge, arms windmilling, trying to regain his balance. His eyes were wide with shock and terror. This wasn't part of his plan. I could have helped him, could have reached out, grabbed his hand, pulled him back to safety. For just a heartbeat, I considered it. But then I thought about Veronica's note, about the months of planning, about the cold calculation in his voice when he discussed my death as a business decision. "Celeste!" he screamed as he went over the edge. I scrambled to the safe side of the washout and looked down. He'd fallen maybe 15 feet onto a ledge covered with pine needles and mud. Not far enough to kill him, but far enough to injure him. He was conscious, moving, but clearly hurt. "Help me," he called up. "I think my leg is broken." I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS signal. Still recording. Still transmitting to the emergency beacon. "Don't worry, Damien," I called down. "Help is on the way. I activated the emergency beacon, remember? Search and rescue will be here soon. You have to help me now. I could have internal injuries." "I'm sure you'll be fine. You're a survivor, remember? That's what you told me. You do whatever it takes to survive." The rain was washing the mud from his face, and I could see his expression clearly now. The charming mask was completely gone, replaced by rage and desperation. "You did this on purpose." "Did what?" "I was trying to cross a dangerous washout in a storm, just like you suggested. It's not my fault you lost your footing." "You pushed me." "Did I?" "Because my emergency beacon has been recording this entire time. GPS location, audio, movement patterns. If I'd pushed you, there would be evidence of that." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "But there's no evidence of me pushing you, Damien. Just like there would have been no evidence of you pushing me if your plan had worked." The look on his face told me he finally understood. He'd been outplayed by someone he'd underestimated, undone by the same careful planning he'd thought made him so clever. "Enjoy explaining to the rescue team how you ended up down there," I called. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about our romantic hike." As I continued down the trail toward help, I could hear him shouting behind me, his voice growing fainter with each step. The storm was passing, the rain lightening to a steady drizzle. By the time I reached the parking lot, I knew exactly what I was going to tell the authorities. And I had the evidence to back up every word. The parking lot was empty except for our rental car and an old pickup truck that belonged to the trail maintenance crew. I sat on the tailgate of their truck, wrapped in an emergency blanket one of the workers had given me, watching the flashing lights of the rescue vehicles wind their way up the mountain road. 3 hours had passed since I'd stumbled into the ranger station, soaking wet and claiming my husband had fallen during our hike. The story I told was simple, believable, and technically true. We'd been caught in the storm, attempted to cross a dangerous washout, and Damien had lost his footing on the unstable ground. I'd tried to help but couldn't reach him safely, so I'd continued down to get professional rescue assistance. A tragic accident during hazardous weather conditions. I didn't mention the text messages, the insurance policy, or the confession of murder plans. Not yet. That evidence was safely stored in multiple locations, but this wasn't the time or place for that conversation. First, I needed to see how Damien would play his hand. Search and rescue had reached him within 2 hours. Broken leg, dislocated shoulder, some cuts and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. He was conscious and coherent when they brought him down on a stretcher, which meant he'd had plenty of time to think about what he was going to say. As the ambulance pulled into the parking area, I stood up and walked over, playing the concerned wife perfectly. Several witnesses were watching. Paramedics, rescue workers, park rangers. Whatever happened next would be very public. "Oh my God, Damien!" I rushed to the stretcher as they loaded him into the ambulance. "Are you okay? I was so scared." He looked up at me, his face pale with pain and something else. Calculation. Even injured and defeated, he was still trying to figure out how to win. "Celeste," he said weakly, "thank God you're safe. I was so worried about you out there alone." Perfect. The loving husband, more concerned about his wife's welfare than his own injuries. Several of the rescue workers smiled at the touching scene. "What happened up there?" asked Ranger Patricia Morrison, a woman I'd spoken with extensively while waiting for the rescue team. "Can you walk us through it?" "We were trying to cross that washout section when the storm hit," Damien said, his voice carefully strained. "The ground was so unstable. I was trying to help Celeste across when I lost my footing." He reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm just grateful she made it safely." He insisted on going first, I added, playing my part, always trying to protect me. I told him it was too dangerous, but you know how men are. The ranger chuckled. "Classic husband move. You're lucky the fall wasn't worse, Mr. Hartley. That section of trail has been problematic all season." "I know how lucky I am," Damien said, his eyes meeting mine. "Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have such a smart, capable wife who knew exactly what to do." It was masterfully done. He was positioning himself as the victim of a tragic accident while simultaneously praising my intelligence and quick thinking. If I tried to accuse him of attempted murder now, it would look like I was attacking an injured man who'd just publicly declared his love and admiration for me. "We'll need to take him to Memorial Hospital in Riverside for x-rays and proper treatment," the lead paramedic said. "Ma'am, you're welcome to follow us down." "Of course," I said. I wouldn't leave his side. During the hour-long drive to the hospital, I had time to think about my next move. Damien was clearly going to stick with the accident story, probably hoping that his injuries would generate enough sympathy to make any future accusation seem vindictive. He might even use this as an opportunity to have me committed. After all, what kind of wife accuses her injured husband of trying to kill her? But he'd made one crucial mistake. He thought this was still a game where charm and manipulation could win. He didn't understand that he was no longer playing against his trusting wife. He was now dealing with an investigative professional who had evidence, documentation, and a very clear understanding of exactly what he'd tried to do. At the hospital, I played the devoted wife while doctors examined Damien's injuries and ran tests. Broken fibula, dislocated shoulder, mild concussion. Painful but not serious. He'd be in the hospital overnight for observation, then released with a cast and some pain medication. While he was getting his x-rays, I stepped outside and made 3 phone calls. The first was to my sister Autumn. "The trip took an unexpected turn," I told her. "Damien had an accident. I'm gonna need you to do something for me." I gave her specific instructions about retrieving certain documents from our house, along with the spare key location. The second call was to James Mitchell at Hartwell & Associates. "I need a favor," I said. "Professional consultation on a case involving insurance fraud and attempted murder." I outlined the basics and asked him to prepare a legal briefing for the authorities. The third call was to Detective Sarah Chen with the Riverside Police Department, someone I'd worked with on previous cases through my job. "Sarah, it's Celeste. I need to report a crime, but it's complicated. Can you meet me at Memorial Hospital?" 2 hours later, Detective Chen arrived with a digital recorder and a very serious expression. We sat in the hospital cafeteria while I laid out everything. The text messages, the insurance policy, the recorded confessions, the GPS evidence from the emergency beacon. "This is substantial," she said after reviewing the audio files and screenshots. "But you know a defense attorney will argue that the trail incident was exactly what it looked like, an accident during dangerous conditions." "I know. But the pattern of behavior, the financial motive, the recorded confession of intent, it adds up to attempted murder. And there's something else." I pulled out my phone and showed her the final piece of evidence I'd been saving. While Damien was being treated, I had a chance to test that thermos he'd packed. The chamomile tea tested positive for zolpidem, sleeping medication, enough to cause significant drowsiness and disorientation. Detective Chen's eyebrows rose. You tested it yourself? Field testing kit from my job. Chain of custody might be questionable, but it confirms what he confessed to on the mountain. He was planning to drug me, make me disoriented enough for an accident to look natural. We'll need to run our own tests, but this gives us probable cause. She stood up. I think it's time we had a conversation with your husband. The confrontation in Damien's hospital room was almost anticlimactic. Faced with recorded confessions, digital evidence, financial documentation, and a thermos full of drug tea, his lawyer, hastily summoned from Portland, advised him to remain silent. But silence was its own kind of confession. Detective Chen arrested him in his hospital bed on charges of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The look on his face when she read him his rights was something I'd remember forever, the moment he finally understood that his victim had become his judge. The media attention was intense, but brief. Local man attempts to murder wife for insurance money was the kind of story that captivated people for a few days before moving on to the next scandal. I gave one interview to a crime journalist who specialized in cases where intended victims fought back. What would you say to other women who might be in similar situations? She asked. Trust your instincts, I said. And remember that love shouldn't make you naive. If something feels wrong, investigate. Document everything. And never forget that the person trying to hurt you is counting on you being too trusting, too loyal, or too scared to fight back. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, while Damien was serving a 15-year sentence at the state penitentiary. I kept the house, the car, and half of our savings. The $800,000 life insurance policy was voided due to the criminal intent behind it. But I didn't need blood money to start over. Veronica was arrested as an accomplice 3 weeks after Damien. Turned out she had a history of insurance fraud in 2 other states, and my case gave prosecutors the leverage they needed to connect her to those crimes as well. Her dream of a new life in Costa Rica became a reality check in a federal prison. I still work at Hartwell and Associates, but now I specialize in cases involving domestic financial crimes. There are more of them than people realize. Spouses who steal retirement funds, partners who forge signatures on loans, family members who manipulate inheritance documents. I've become very good at helping people who've been betrayed by the people they trusted most. Sometimes I think about that moment on the mountain when Damien reached for me, when I could have saved him from falling. I don't regret letting him fall. But I do think about the woman I was before that trip. Trusting, optimistic, believing that love was always honest. That woman died on that mountain trail, and I can't say I miss her. The woman who walked down from that mountain is stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might try to hurt her. Last week, I got a letter from Damien, prison mail, carefully censored, written in the same handwriting that used to leave me sweet notes in my lunch. He's sorry, he says. He loves me, he claims. It was all Veronica's idea, he insists. If I could just visit him, he knows we could work things out. I didn't respond to the letter, but I did frame it and hang it in my office, right next to my investigator's license, and the commendation I received from the state attorney general for my work on domestic fraud cases. It's a reminder of something I learned on that mountain. The most dangerous person in your life might be the one sleeping next to you every night. But it's also a reminder of something else, that being underestimated can be the greatest weapon you'll ever have. Damien thought he was eliminating a problem. Instead, he created an expert in exactly the kind of crimes he wanted to commit.